Established in January 1974, Kerry Cooperative Creameries Limited, or Kerry Co-op, celebrates a special anniversary, 50 years. This podcast series has been created by Mary Lavery Carrig, based on the first board photographed together in January 1974. This is Mary, and you are welcome to A Chat with Mary, Voices from Kerry Co-op's story. In this episode, episode 10, we hear from Mundy Hayes, son of the late Eddie Hayes of Kilflynn. I asked Mundy to tell me about the significant role Eddie Hayes had in the early days of Kerry Co-op.
Eddie Hayes was my father. I'm talking about his involvement setting up of the milk processing facilities in North Kerry. Eddie Hayes was a man that was deeply rooted in the cooperative movement and believed very strongly in the cooperative movement as the proper vehicle to advance farming. Now, in the late 50s, early 60s, people today just couldn't begin to imagine how difficult farming conditions were back then. He and people like him believed strongly that it was essential for farmers in Kerry to have their own processing facility, to have any control over their financial well-being going forward. That is clearly stated in the chairman's report, the first chairman's report of Kerry Co-op in 1975. I'm quoting, as published in the Kerryman, "Many dedicated Kerry farmers have fought hard over the years for such a farmer-owned group to control and influence the income of the Kerry farming community." This is what these people believed in and believed in strongly. Through a lot of hard work over many years, they succeeded. But the story how they succeeded in this is a very interesting story with many twists and turns and many disappointments along the way. I've often said to people, that if you're not in the game, when a bit of good luck comes your way, you won't be able to avail of it. So these people were always in the game, is the word I use. When I refer to these people, I'm talking about the other cooperative societies across North Kerry. They had banded together in a loose federation into what they called themselves the North Kerry Milk Products. Eddie Hayes at the time was the chairman of Abidorney, Kilflynn and later Ballinclimacy Co-op. They were very much involved and the people involved in it were very much involved in getting the other co-ops to join the federation. Because they believed so strongly in the cooperative movement, they believed that by everybody coming together made it all the stronger and would reinforce their case in what they were striving to get. What they were striving to get, what the chairman's report of 75 said, a facility, a processing facility of their own, control over their own financial well-being going forward. Now, when you look at Kerry geographically, it is very easy to see that your back is the Atlantic Ocean. Your avenues for selling milk were very limited. Back then, Golden Vale was a fairly serious operation, as was Ballyclaw in the Cork side. The Kerry cooperative people had no great avenue to market and no very reliable avenue to market. So at all times, this reinforced in their thinking, how crucial it was that they would have a facility of their own. There was no support for dairy industry to be established in Kerry through the 60s and into the late 60s. And to highlight that, Tony O'Reilly, who was appointed the CEO of Bord Banya in 1962, he coined the phrase, the marketing logo that everybody is aware of, Kerry Gold. And the attitude was, that I often wonder why they didn't use Cavan, Leitrim or any other county. But the prevailing attitude was, sure, we'll be offending nobody. There'll never be a dairy industry in Kerry. In the chairman's report of 75, he refers to a delegation that went to Dublin in 1967 looking for a license to process milk. And this license to process milk was a crucial piece. You had to have this if you wanted to establish a factory. The attitude hadn't changed much in 67. There was a delegation of 4 that went to Dublin, and I recall very clearly one of them relating the story to me on occasions, Mr. Feenan Harty of Ballybroman, Abidorney, and the other people in the delegation were Mick Dillon of Abidorney, Doney, and Stephen Fuller of Kilflynn, and Eddie Hayes of Kilflynn. And Feenan went on to describe how the four of them, that they met what he referred to as the grand old gentleman of the Department of Agriculture in Kildare Street. And he described us sitting inside this beautiful mahogany table. And he said, Hayes, he said, was putting up the debate, justifying their case for having a processing facility in Kerry and how they needed the licence. And at the end of the day, Feenan said that one of these grand old gentlemen, as he described them, stood up and he said, what do you need a factory in Kerry for? What have you down there but mountain heath and rushes? Won't Golden Vale take the milk from North Kerry, and Ballyclaw will take the sup from the south? Feenan Hartley described the anger on Eddie's face, how infuriated he was with the complete lack of understanding of the situation of Kerry farmers. He described Hayes rushing away from the building in a hurry, and Feenan having to wait for Mick Dillon and Stephen Fuller, the two elder men who were hobbling along with their walking sticks. So as one can see, from the earlier remark from 62 and the remarks that were passed again in 67, little had changed in the attitude towards an industry, a dairy industry being established in Kerry. Quite clearly, there was no support, and there was no support from Department of Agriculture, from bureaucracy in Dublin, from politicians of the day. So one has to wonder, how did the blockage that was there towards Kerry having a licence, how did that get removed? Now, as I've said earlier about being in the game, and when a bit of good fortune passes your way, if you're in the game, you're able to avail of it. And in this situation, the good fortune that came their way was by the way of a man by the name of John J. Byrne, who was a local from Kilflynn, who had gone to England. In the early 1960s, two very influential and visionary men, Sean Lamass, who was the Taoiseach, and T.J. Whittaker, Secretary of the Department of Finance, from 1956 to 69, began a campaign of rejuvenation in Dublin to get business moving again. They invited successful Irish people who had made their mark in England to come back to try and build the economy. One of those men that returned was John J. Byrne from Kilflynn, who had gone to England in the early 40s and had become very successful as a builder-developer after the war, and also had interests in the entertainment sector. John Byrne was a neighbour of Eddie Hayes's and a lifelong friend of Eddie Hayes's, a proud Kerryman who always kept himself informed of what was happening in his native county. When he returned to Dublin, the first building he put up in 1964 was O'Connell's Bridge House, which stands there by O'Connell's Bridge in Dublin. In a conversation with me, John Burns recalled meeting the then Minister for Finance, Charles J. Haughey, at a social function. The Minister approached him and in the course of conversation mentioned to him that the name of a man from your part of Kerry crossed my desk during the week. And the man's name is Eddie Hayes. What would he be like? And John Burns recommended that he'd be a man you could do business with. Sometime after that, Eddie Hayes was contacted by the Department of Agriculture to the effect that the licence was going to be issued. That particular casual meeting was just one of the bits of good fortune that came their way in their endeavours to get something established in Kerry. In the book, The Kerry Way, very, very vividly describes how the Cannons Field came about, and that was that the Listowel Race Company very generously gave this field to North Kerry Milk Products at the same price as they had paid for it originally. They were hoping for a factory to be delivered to Listowel as well. I don't know all the directors, or can't recall them, but Louis O'Connell was one of the prominent directors of the race committee at the time. He's quoted in the Kerry Way book in relation to that. The proposers for a factory, the co-ops, they have the licence, they have the farmers to produce the milk, they have the site which was made available to them by the Listowel Race Company, very generously, as I've said. There was also, from documentation, a certain level of funding available from the provincial bank towards funding a new venture. With all these other bits and pieces in place, the farmers to produce the milk, the site that was so generously made available, the licence to process the milk. The final bit of the jigsaw now is to get a partner to do business with. There had been a few things proposed which came to nothing. There was one they sent somebody to inspect a factory that had been taken out in Brittany, that it might be of some use. Somebody was sent to inspect it, like it was found to be totally unsuitable, wouldn't work at all, like, you know. There had been a few false dawns on that front. The next bit of good fortune that came their way was when these wonderful American people showed up. That was a young married couple, Sylvia and Bob Seward. Sylvia was the daughter of a man by the name of Arthur Reisenbiegler, who had a company in America, Airy Casing. Now, this young couple got married, and Sylvia was after completing her master's degree in university, and they went on honeymoon to Europe. They flew into Germany, this young couple, on their honeymoon. Their first visit was to the Volkswagen factory in Hanover, where they had commissioned a new spec'd out camper van for themselves, and that they were going to tour the capitals of Europe. Sylvia had been given instructions by her father. Maybe she might make contact with their suppliers of casing while they were there, and which she did, and she found out that these weren't actually producers, these were actually middlemen that were sourcing the casing and selling it onto them and taking a substantial slice for themselves. So they formulated the opinion, the idea that if they could find somebody that they could maybe get into business with someplace in Europe, that it might be a better option for them. They travelled through Europe, and they travelled onto England and London, and they finished up in Dublin. They went into the Irish Dairy Board in Dublin, and this very sophisticated young American couple, and people were looking at them rather sceptically, inquiring about the possibility of sourcing casing here in Ireland. Now, at that point in time in Ireland, the Irish dairy industry consisted of the basics, like, you know, the fresh milk, butter, cheese, milk powder. Chocolate crumb was a small piece of it, but that was about the size of the Irish dairy industry at that particular point in time. And the domestic market here, yes, the Kerry Gold was making headway in the English market and further afield into Europe. But more than that, the Irish dairy industry hadn't spread its wings across the world to any great extent at this stage. This American couple, they were directed down to Kerry, and they met with Eddie Hayes, who was the representative at the time for North Kerry Milk Products. On one side, you had this very articulate young American lady holding a master's degree, her husband Bob with a background in casing, and Eddie Hayes, a North Kerry farmer with a serious passion for a factory for North Kerry. But they must have got on very well in their discussions. Where it all finished up was that they got in contact with her father. Whatever connection was made between them at their meeting, like, must have been very, very good, because their father, Ardy Reisenbiegel, got in contact with Eddie Hayes, and he said yes, that they'd be very interested to do business with them. There was certain negotiations, but they entered into a gentleman's agreement that they would be part of the factory, the proposed factory. They'd build it in this Stole on their site, they'd produce casing, and they'd supply that casing to, he had the market for it in America. And I suppose when one looks further down the road than just that meeting, like North Kerry Milk Products, which was later Kerry Co-op, that from the word go, they were exposed to the American market, which the vast majority of the Irish dairy industry wasn't. And it was from there that all the great opportunities came Kerry's way in later years. So now, with a partner on board, all the building blocks are in place. Jim Maloney, who spoke at Eddie Hayes' funeral, pointed out that he was on the interview panel for the CEO, operating manager of the fledgling North Kerry Milk Products. But as Jim Maloney stated clearly that day, that there was no need of an interview, that Hayes had his man already picked, so that Dennis Proston came in on board as the number one, the first employee of North Kerry Milk Products. He took on the reins and he employed everybody else from there on. The reference there to in the chairman's report of 75 about the disappointment in 67, they were looking for a license to process milk to get a factory established. They had most of the building blocks in place at that stage, but when one looks at it, maybe it was a bit of good fortune for them, for if they had started in 67, that the management team that was put in place in 72 were only young fellas in college who had not yet finished their college. By the time it came to 72, these guys were 26, 27-year-olds. And, we're up to the job, as it has shown. To conclude the story of the early years and the struggle it was to get something in place, 1972 was the start of the North Kerry milk products. 2 years later, as everybody knows, Kerry Co-op came into being. After the Minister, Mark Clinton, disbanded Bord Bonnia, and the assets of Bord Bonnia in the Kerry area were acquired by North Kerry Milk Products, and that meant the whole county joined up together. That's what Kerry Co-op, as everybody has known from the 1st of January 74, came into being, and that's what everybody has known Kerry Co-op to be since then. Many people described Eddie Hayes in many different ways, and some people described him as a force of nature, a great believer in the workings of the cooperative movement and how beneficial it was for his fellow farmers. The cooperative movement was basically that everybody working together for the benefit of everybody. He was very determined, very strong-willed. Failure was not an option in his book. He had great respect for people and didn't suffer fools gladly, as they say. Had great respect and loved company, like most people do. When things had to get serious, he was very serious, and didn't give up lightly, as I said, and would stick it out to the bitter end, and finish the race. That was it. He played hurling with Crotta, won a few county championships with them back in the day. He was involved in ploughing, horse ploughing back in the day as well. He partook in a lot of the things that most farmers and young people in any parish in his day took part in. He was always cut out to do something like this. His teacher, Master Hollern in National School, remarked that it was one of the greatest disappointments in his teaching career that Eddie Hayes didn't go on for further education, because back in the day, the eldest son was kept at home on the farm. That was kind of the way things were. That he succeeded in other things. He had a full and fruitful life, like any man would hope to have.
I wish to say a sincere thank you to Mundy Hayes. Thank you too to Charlie Nelligan for concertina music. You have been listening to a podcast series, episode 10, from A Chat with Mary, Voices from Kerry Co-op's Story. This is Mary Lavery Carrig, and thank you for listening.